The emergence of Oblivion's fist. No one had glimpsed a human ship in nearly 2 centuries, not among the outer rings, nor the bustling trade lanes of the inner sectors, not even in the forsaken no-man's zones where rusting derelicts and desperate scavengers drifted like cosmic phantoms. To most species, humanity was now myth, an ancient warning whispered to unruly younglings at bedtime. Be good, or the humans will return. An echo, a ghost story fading further with every passing generation. But myths some knew had roots in truth. The Zarkari High Council, seated atop their crystalline spires of authority, knew better than to laugh off such specters. Hidden deep within vaults sealed by encryption, buried beneath layers of political deceit, lay grim records, unchanged for 200 years. Reports of colonies wiped clean in the span of minutes. Entire armadas erased without a trace. Grainy, horrifying footage capturing a lone figure clad in pitch-black armor, striding through fields of plasma and ruin unbothered by the apocalypse raging around it. Each report bore a chilling universal warning, caution written in every known galactic tongue. Thus, when the long-range sensors of Sector 9 flared awake, detecting an unknown mass moving across a long, abandoned dead zone, the High Council was summoned in immediate urgency. Crystalline bells tolled as the members converged into the Grand Chamber, faces tight with suppressed dread. High Chancellor Vorak, a figure of imposing authority adorned with the traditional Zarkari regalia, slammed his staff onto the chamber floor, the resulting crack echoing through the vaulted dome. Are we certain it's human? His voice trembled at the edges, betraying more fear than he would ever admit. Admiral Serenus, his skin an uneasy shade of violet, under the shimmering lights, nodded grimly. The architecture matches old Terran hull designs, triangular stern, dual-core reactors. Carbon titanium shielding. There's no broadcast, no transponder codes, just silence, and it's coming straight through. General Threx, commander of planetary defenses, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing into predatory slits. And the weapons systems. Serenus hesitated, visibly swallowing his rising panic. Offline. But the ship's mass is over 7 kilometers long, sir. It's massive. A murmur rippled through the council. Perhaps it's derelict, a junior official suggested, voice brittle with desperate hope. No, Vorak said flatly. Derelicts drift. This one moves like it remembers where it's going. They would come to call it Oblivion's Fist, not because that was its name, but because of what followed it. The first to reach out was Station Takar 9, a small outpost along the sector's edge. They sent a standard diplomatic, hail, friendly, curious offering. No threat. A few seconds later, the station and its crew were reduced to vapor, obliterated into cosmic dust, before the last syllable of their transmission could echo into space. No warning, no response. Just instant, emotionless annihilation. Silence returned as the ship moved on, neither speeding nor cloaking itself, as if it had no concern for anything the galaxy could throw at it, as if it wanted to be seen. Panic began spreading like a contagion. Military commanders scrambled their fleets. Emergency meetings overrode all other governmental processes. The Zarkari Grand Armada, an assembly of over 12,000 vessels, capable of reducing a gas giant to molten shrapnel, was summoned to form a defensive barrier at the threshold of their homeworld. The ship came anyway. Not fast, not evasive, it came steadily, deliberately, like judgment, given physical form. From the command bridge of the Grand Armada, Admiral Serenus watched the ghostly silhouette draw closer across the void. Readings from every ship in the fleet confirmed the impossible. No visible weapons online. No shields raised, no apparent hostile transmissions. The fleet's orders were simple: hold the line. The first shot came from the Zari destroyer Vexus Prum, a concentrated plasma beam targeted directly at the vessel's exposed stern, a kill shot by every known standard of space warfare. The beam struck home, illuminating the void with a flare of blinding light. When the scanners recalibrated, the Oblivion's Fist remained untouched. No scorch marks, no hull damage, not even a tremor of acknowledgement. Then it responded, not with conventional weaponry, but with something far more horrifying. Gravity itself twisted. On the view screens, the destroyer crumpled like a discarded drink can, folding inward into a singularity no bigger than a marble before disappearing entirely. No explosion. No wreckage. Simply erased. Panic turned into pandemonium. Admiral Serenus barked orders, and the sky blossomed into chaotic fury. Thousands of ships unleashed a symphony of annihilation beams, missiles, antimatter torpedoes, weapons capable of unmaking entire moons. The human warship endured, it waited, and when it struck back, it was merciless. In a single blink, the front line 4,000 ships vanished. No explosions, no debris. One moment they were there. The next, the void swallowed them whole. Sensors didn't even register the moment of their demise. Retreat was ordered, but to where? Oblivion's fist did not chase. It did not accelerate. It moved forward steadily like a god wading through insects, unstoppable and unhurried. Back in the Grand Chamber, High Chancellor Vorak stood frozen before the live transmission feed, watching the dark silhouette blot out distant stars growing ever closer. "We told ourselves they were gone," Vorak whispered hoarsely. "We mocked their savagery, their primitiveness." He turned face pale and grim. They didn't vanish. The room, once alive with political debate and confident boasts, fell deathly silent. They waited. The annihilation of Takar 9 in the Grand Armada. The aftermath of Takar 9's annihilation rippled through Zarkari space like a seismic shockwave. Outposts scrambled to reinforce defenses, but the tremors of fear spread faster than any order. No one had seen it happen. There had been no observable weapon discharge from the human ship. Yet, the result was unmistakable. The entire station had been reduced to ash, scattered across the void like an offering to some unseen god of destruction. And still Oblivion's fist moved unstoppably. The Grand Armada, in all its terrible glory, assembled with desperate haste, 12,000 ships bristling with weapons capable of sundering planets, arrayed themselves into a wall between the human warship and the Zarkari homeworld. Dreadnoughts, cruisers, carriers, the pride of a millennium of martial dominance, lined up across the dark vacuum like a shimmering tide of metal and firepower. Admiral Serenus, overseeing the fleet from the bridge of the flagship Supremacy's crown, watched the incoming silhouette with growing horror. The tactical displays bloomed with targeting data, predictive trajectories, firing solutions, all useless. The Oblivion's fist didn't mask its presence, it didn't jam sensors or deploy decoys. No countermeasures were needed. It advanced in plain sight, daring them to stop it. And deep within, every soldier, every officer gnawed an ancient primal fear. This was no ordinary enemy. The first salvo came in a staggered wave: plasma lances, quantum warheads, singularity torpedoes, all the most devastating weapons the Zarkari arsenal could muster. For a moment, space itself seemed to scream under the onslaught as beams stitched glowing scars across the void. The barrage engulfed the Oblivion's fist. For a heartbeat, then the scanners cleared and the horror deepened. The warship floated unscathed, untouched, as if reality itself bent to its will. The beams that should have atomized it dispersed like mist on contact. Warheads veered away at the last second, detonating harmlessly against the emptiness of space. It did not retaliate immediately. Instead, it waited, as if judging them, as if offering them a chance to comprehend the inevitability of their doom. General Threx, commanding the second line of defense, ordered a concentrated bombardment with the Nova Cannon's artillery, powerful enough to fracture small moons. The cannons charged the very air aboard the ships, vibrating with the magnitude of the energy being mustered. They fired. Columns of blinding energy converged upon the human warship. The light faded. Oblivion's fist remained unmoved, unbroken, unbothered. "Impossible," Serenus whispered, his hands trembling on the command rail. It was then the warship answered, not with fire or conventional destruction, but with an affront to the very laws of existence. The fabric of space around it rippled, twisted, and snapped. The front line of the Grand Armada, nearly 4,000 vessels, vanished. Gone. No explosions, no wreckage, no dying screams broadcast over comms. One moment they were there, the next they ceased to exist, as if reality had been edited and they were no longer part of the script. Panic detonated across the remaining fleets. Ships veered away. Disciplines shattered. Communications devolved into a cacophony of screams, desperate prayers, and incoherent orders. Entire squadrons turned their engines toward the distant stars, fleeing for corners of the galaxy where the human warship might never find them. Admiral Serenus fought to retain control. He bellowed for order, tried to reform the shattered battle lines, but fear had already metastasized. The Zarkari Armada, undefeated for millennia, broke apart like brittle glass under the weight of the nightmare that had returned. Across command centers and bunkers, planet-side leaders watched in paralyzed horror as the chaos unfolded. On the surface of Zar Prime Ressa, the young communications technician stood among her colleagues, watching the live feed on a trembling holoscreen. She wasn't old enough to remember the last wars, but her grandfather had whispered stories when drink loosened his tongue. Stories of battles where human soldiers clad in black had fought like demons, tales dismissed as drunken ramblings. Until now. Now as she watched the sky tear itself apart, she understood he hadn't been drunk. He had been afraid. Above them, the atmosphere shimmered unnaturally. Strange distortions marred the clouds. The gravity fluctuated, dragging loose debris into slow, lazy spirals. Wind screamed without direction. Time itself seemed to stutter, frames skipping like a damaged recording. It was not merely destruction, it was unmaking. Back in the Grand Chamber, High Chancellor Vorak gripped the edge of the central dais so tightly that cracks spiderwebbed across the crystalline surface. His advisors screamed, conflicting orders. Deploy planetary shields, summon reinforcements from the outer colonies, initiate the ancient Exodus protocols, but none of it mattered. There was nowhere to flee. The Oblivion's fist was not hunting them, it was judging them. Vorak leaned closer to the live feed where the warship now loomed impossibly vast, a silent black silhouette blotting out stars. "This is not war," he said, voice hollow. "This is judgment." A deathly hush fell over the chamber. One by one, the advisors turned to stare at the growing shadow in space, understanding too late that no amount of firepower could stop what was coming. A desperate plan was concocted in whispers. Initiate the planetary shield matrix, an ancient device long mothballed capable of wrapping Zar Prime in an impenetrable shell of energy. It had not been used in centuries, deemed unnecessary by an empire that believed itself invincible. Emergency crews scrambled to the shield control centers. Massive reactors spun to life, siphoning power from every auxiliary source. The entire planet dimmed as lights flickered and died, energy redirected to the shield array. Across Zar Prime, sirens wailed a sound not heard in generations. In orbit, the surviving fragments of the Grand Armada regrouped, forming ragged defensive screens. They knew it was futile, but military doctrine demanded resistance, even in the face of inevitable annihilation. The Oblivion's fist slowed as it approached the planetary perimeter. For a moment, a collective breath was held. Then, without a shot fired, it simply stopped, hanging there, waiting, watching. The shield generators roared to full capacity, casting an incandescent bubble of energy around the world. It shimmered, brightly defiant, a final barrier between the remnants of the Zarkari people and the doom that loomed beyond. And for the first time, there was a sliver of hope. Perhaps the shield could hold. Perhaps the Oblivion's fist would not breach it. Perhaps they could survive. It was a comforting lie. In the dark void beyond, the warship remained utterly still. No weapons charged, no fighters launched, only silence. And then from the bowels of the ship, a single object detached, a small, dark pod, unassuming against the backdrop of nightmare. It drifted toward this planet, slow and steady, trailing a thin line of molten atmosphere as it pierced the upper skies. No weapons were detected, no threat was registered, and yet every soul on Zar Prime knew deep within their ancient instincts that the true terror had only just begun. The pod burned through the heavens like a black comet. Its destination was clear: the capital, the heart of Zarkari pride, the cradle of their arrogance. And as it fell, a cold understanding settled over every observer, civilian and military alike. This wasn't an invasion. This was a reckoning. Revenant 01 descends in the revelation of truth. The pod tore through the atmosphere of Zar Prime like a black spear hurled by some ancient cosmic force. Its surface glowed with molten fury, red-hot veins streaking across its shell as it plunged toward the heart of the capital. Entire districts went silent, citizens gathering in streets and rooftops, heads craned upward as they watched the symbol of their impending reckoning streak across the skies. Sirens wailed, but no interceptors launched. Defense grids remained dormant. No missiles chased the falling object. It was as if the planet itself, sensing what approached, refused to resist. Systems glitched. Sensors froze, and the very spirit of Zar Prime buckled under the weight of something far greater than mere invasion, something inevitable. In the subterranean command center, buried deep beneath the capital, High Chancellor Vorak and Admiral Serenus stared at the feed, their faces drained of all color. The pod was small, harmless by size and shape alone, yet both leaders knew that its arrival marked something far worse than a conventional attack. The pod descended into the ancient Plaza of Judgment, a plaza that once hosted public executions, a fitting irony that none dared acknowledge aloud. Stone cracked and smoke hissed as the object settled gently into place, landing with a hiss of compressed air in a slow unfurling of blackened metal. Across the city, citizens watched from windows, balconies, and barricades. Soldiers, their weapons trembling in their grips, formed loose perimeters around the impact site but held their ground at a distance, unsure whether to advance or flee. For long moments, there was only silence. Then, with a slow mechanical groan, the pod opened. A ramp lowered with a sharp metallic clank, and from the interior shadow, something stepped forward. Something that made the blood of every living being on Zar Prime run cold. It was human, or had once been. The figure stood nearly 8 feet tall, clad in ancient Terran war armor, black as the void between galaxies. The armor was cracked and scarred, bearing the marks of battles lost to history, yet it remained a thing of terrifying beauty. Crimson sigils, faded but still burning, faintly adorned the plates like war trophies. The helmet was shaped like a human skull, a relic of psychological warfare doctrines long abandoned by more civilized species. For a moment, the figure simply stood at the top of the ramp, surveying the plaza with a stillness that made the heart falter. The air around him seemed heavier, reality itself bending slightly under his gaze. Then he moved. Each step thundered across the plaza, a drumbeat of inevitability that no force dared interrupt. Civilians scattered before him like leaves in a storm, their instinct for survival overwhelming their pride. In the surveillance chamber, Vorak leaned closer to the screen, breath held as if proximity might grant him better understanding. "I remember that armor," he whispered, voice dry with disbelief. Admiral Serenus, standing beside him, shook his head, his voice a hoarse rasp. "It's not possible. That was a myth, Project Revenant. It was supposed to have failed." Vorak said nothing, because he knew it hadn't failed. It had waited. The Revenant strode to the center of the plaza where the stone underfoot bore the sigil of Zarkari supremacy. He paused, the imposing figure framed by a skyline now choked with ash and flame. Slowly, deliberately, he reached up and removed his helmet. A collective gasp rippled through those watching, both in person and across the millions tuned into emergency broadcasts. Some fell to their knees, others turned away in shame. Beneath the helmet was not a monster, not a machine. It was a man. A human face, burned and scarred beyond natural aging, stared out over the capital. One eye was a pale, haunted void. The other had been replaced with a mechanical orb that glowed faintly red. His jaw bore the signs of a break that had never properly healed, yet he stood tall, defiant, unbroken. In that face, the Zarkari saw not rage, but something far worse: memory. A memory that had survived fire, betrayal, and centuries of silence. He looked skyward, where the remnants of the Grand Armada still hovered, their ships trembling under the power of the shield matrix. Then, lowering his gaze, he stared directly into the nearest security drone. His voice carried across every open channel, vibrating with a rawness that chilled the soul. "I was 6 years old when you came," he said, his voice like gravel torn from the earth. "You took my family, made me kill my own, made me watch." The plaza seemed to contract around him, the very air heavy with unshed guilt. "Then you put steel in my spine, fire in my skull, told me I'd never be human again." He took a step forward, the ground cracking beneath his armored boots. "But I survived," he growled. "We all did." Another step, in the void, in the dark, in the silence you left behind. Another step, and now we bring it back to you. The feed cut abruptly to black. Panic erupted across the capital, sirens doubled in volume. Evacuation orders blared from loudspeakers, but few had the presence of mind to follow them. Civilians ran in every direction, not from enemy fire, but from the suffocating presence of a memory made flesh. High above, Oblivion's fist stirred once more, but it did not move toward the planet. Instead, it shifted toward the remnants of the fleet, a slow, deliberate pivot that spoke volumes without uttering a word. High Chancellor Vorak surged to his feet, slamming his fists onto the console. "Get him!" he barked. "Bring him to me alive!" Admiral Serenus snapped into action, dispatching Special Forces units toward the plaza. But even as orders were screamed and soldiers rallied, a deep, bone-rattling tremor shook the ground. In the skies above, the next phase of humanity's judgment unfolded. From the underbelly of Oblivion's fist, hundreds of dark shapes began to fall. Coffins twisted, jagged, asymmetric. They hurtled toward the surface, not as weapons, but as omens. As they neared the ground, the coffins cracked open, and from within spilled the Revenants. Humans clad in armor, blacker than the void, dropped like hammers from heaven. They made no sound as they landed, no roar, no battle cry, only the deafening impact of inevitability as each warrior struck the earth with devastating force. The capital screamed. They moved with horrifying precision, no waste, no chaos. Every step was measured, every action deliberate. Defense arrays were bypassed before they could activate. Communications hubs were neutralized without gunfire. I-cores were disabled with surgical efficiency. They did not slaughter civilians. They did not torch buildings. Their vengeance was not mindless. It was engineered. In the Plaza of Judgment, the first Revenant, the one who had spoken, watched silently as his brethren fell around him. A storm of retribution made flesh. He did not move to lead them. He did not need to. He was not a general. He was a message. Ressa, hiding in the wreckage of a shattered administration center, clutched her brother to her chest as she watched the black armored figures sweep through the city. One passed mere meters from her, his red eyes scanning the surroundings. He did not even glance her way. She was beneath notice. Not the target, but not safe either. The message was clear. The humans had not returned to conquer. They had returned to remind. And every Zarkari soul, from the highest general to the smallest child, understood in that moment. The reckoning had only just begun. The Revenants' descent and the silent conquest. The sky above Zar Prime burned. From the belly of Oblivion's fist, the dark shapes kept falling. Coffins wrenched open mid-air, releasing their payload of human revenants. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, descended without sound, slicing through the atmosphere like knives through silk. They did not descend like soldiers. They fell like judgments. The first wave struck the city with terrifying precision. Each impact a dull boom that sent tremors through the shattered streets. Yet there were no explosions, no wild gunfire. The Revenants did not come to destroy indiscriminately. They came with purpose, each move as preordained as a blood ritual. Where once the Zarkari armies had marched in triumph through the capital's shining boulevards, now the streets were filled with the silent, relentless advance of a force no one had prepared for because no one believed it could exist. The Revenants were not machines, though their movements seemed inhumanly precise. They were not beasts, though a primal feral purpose burned in their every motion. They were something else, something worse. They were memory forged into armor and vengeance. At major intersections, Revenants secured control points, communications relays were torn offline, defense turrets confused by the shifting gravity fields surrounding each Revenant refused to lock targets. AI defense hubs, once the pride of Zarkari engineering, fell silent, without even a struggle. Inside bunkers and government compounds, the panic deepened. Alarms blared warning of perimeter breaches, but no standard defense measures succeeded. Security doors unlocked themselves without external triggers. Automated drone patrols powered down, ignoring command overrides. In the underground compound of the council itself, fear had turned from a simmer to a boil. Vorak barked orders into his console, demanding updates. How are they breaching our internal systems? Where is the fleet? Where is our shield command? Admiral Serenus, pale and sweat-drenched, answered with hollow eyes. It's human code, ancient, seeded into our infrastructure centuries ago, waiting. We didn't purge it because we didn't know it existed. Vorak staggered back from the console, horror dawning in his mind. They didn't just survive, he whispered. They prepared. And now their preparation bore fruit. Outside, across the capital, the Revenants advanced with relentless inevitability. They did not need orders. They did not need to communicate. Every movement seemed choreographed, as if the entire operation had been rehearsed, not once but for generations. At the main relay tower, Ressa clutched her brother tightly beneath the twisted ruins of an archway. Through the cracked remains of the plaza, she saw them moving shadows, death incarnate. One Revenant landed a few meters away. His armor bore the deep scars of untold battles, black and angular, pulsing faintly with a red glow beneath its seams. He moved with terrifying grace, scanning the area, dispatching 2 Zarkari guards with tranquilizer rounds, so fast their bodies hadn't even hit the ground before he was already moving onward. He did not see her, or perhaps worse, he chose not to acknowledge her. She was irrelevant. Beneath notice, they weren't here to destroy civilians. They weren't here to conquer the city. They were here to hollow it out, to cut the heart from it. Infiltration, not annihilation. Control, not chaos. Every critical system of governance, communication, and defense was methodically disabled. Police networks went dead. Emergency beacons flickered into static. Military command centers fell eerily silent as their systems turned against their operators. Not a shot was fired against civilians, but in every street, every alley, the Revenants stood watch, silent, patient, unmoving unless challenged. And those few who dared challenge them were neutralized with almost surgical restraint, non-lethal takedowns, incapacitations without cruelty. The message was unmistakable. You are not the enemy. You are simply irrelevant. It was a humiliation more devastating than bombardment, an erasure not of bodies but of pride. Within the walls of the council's command compound, chaos descended into horror. Layers of security built over centuries were peeled away like rotted fruit. Security personnel found themselves locked inside their own barracks. Internal AI defenses refused to obey. Drones turned their targeting systems inward. The temperature rose inexplicably throughout the complex, an invisible pressure building. Advisors wept openly. Soldiers threw down their weapons, unable to comprehend how they had already lost without a true battle. Counselor Brethrak's personal guard was found unconscious, bodies carefully stacked outside the council chamber. No blood, no signs of violence. Their systems had been overridden, their armor remotely shut down. In the surveillance feed, the halls of power, once symbols of unassailable authority, were now eerily empty. A voice cut through the comms, soft but undeniable. "Identify yourself." The feed shifted to a drone's view, revealing a lone figure walking calmly through the compound's outer ring, the same Revenant who had descended into the plaza. He moved without fear, without haste, the devastation parting before him like a black tide. The council security drone hovered before him, weapons poised. The Revenant raised his head. "I am Revenant 01, he said, his voice gravel over steel. "But you may call me the echo of your sins." He raised his open palm to the drone. Above in orbit, Oblivion's fist responded, not with fire, not with death, with memory. Every screen, every broadcast channel, every forgotten transmission node throughout Zarkari space lit up simultaneously. The truth long buried was unleashed. Footage flooded the networks, raw, unedited, sickening. Executions of human prisoners, children and civilians alike. Experiments grotesque and systematic performed on the youngest survivors of Earth's fall. Propaganda broadcasts where Zarkari leaders laughed over human suffering. Treaties signed with blood, then broken without remorse. Across the galaxy, the narrative of the noble Zarkari shattered like brittle glass. Not a word accompanied the footage. There was no need. The past spoke more eloquently than any declaration ever could. In the outer colonies, allied governments froze in horror. Neutral species severed ties with the Zarkari without hesitation. Former trade partners issued public statements of disavowal, their faces twisted with barely concealed rage and shame. The fall of the Zarkari Empire had begun not in flames but in revelation, and it was unstoppable. On the streets of Zar Prime, the people gathered beneath the flickering screens staring up at their own complicity, projected 10 stories high. Tears streamed down faces young and old. Mothers shielded their children's eyes too late. Veterans wept openly, recognizing faces they had once cheered to kill. And the Revenants, they did not cheer. They did not gloat. They stood silently at key intersections and plazas, armor gleaming dully under the red-tinged sky. Silent sentinels of the truth they had brought to light. Above it all, looming like a forgotten god, hung Oblivion's fist, unchallenged, unyielding, waiting. The judgment was not over. It had only just begun. The truth unleashed, the Empire shattered. The footage continued to pour across every screen, every frequency, every available sensory channel. It bypassed encryption, ignored firewalls, overwhelmed every attempt to block it. From the grand cities of the core worlds to the smallest mining colonies on the rim, there was no escape. Every citizen of the Zarkari Empire was made to watch, and worse, they remembered. The monstrous archives replayed the systematic humiliation of humanity, not in sanitized reports, not in carefully edited documentaries, but in raw, brutal reality. Children stripped of their futures, colonies razed with clinical indifference, mass graves stretching across the broken continents of Earth. For many, it was the first time they realized the myths about humanity's wildness had been carefully crafted, as the humans had not been monsters. They had been victims, brutalized, erased, manipulated into silence. The propaganda the Zarkari elite had built their empire upon crumbled into dust under the weight of the unfiltered truth. Inside the council chamber, silence reigned, not the silence of planning, not the silence of calculation, the silence of knowing it was already too late. Vorak sat slumped in his chair, his hands trembling as they hovered uselessly over the console. Around him, the last members of the High Council either stared blankly at the feed or collapsed into muttered broken prayers. Admiral Serenus leaned heavily against the wall, eyes hollow. "They're not here to conquer," he said hoarsely. "They're not here for war." Vorak forced his mouth to move. "Then why?" "They're here to unmake us," Serenus whispered. It was no longer about battleships or troop movements. No fleet, no army could fight a war against memory, against the kind of shame that burrowed into the soul and ate it from within. On the streets, the societal fabric of Zar Prime began to fray in real time. Riots broke out not against the Revenants who still stood silently at their posts, but among the citizens themselves. Parents screamed at teachers, students demanded answers their instructors could not give. Statues of Zarkari heroes were defaced or torn down by furious mobs who no longer recognized the faces carved in stone. In the outer colonies, worse news came. Voster 4, one of the most prominent Zarkari colony worlds, announced its immediate withdrawal from the Empire. The planetary governor, once a proud, hand-picked servant of the council, stood before a live broadcast and confessed, "We benefited from the silence no more." Within hours, 3 more worlds followed. Then 12, then 39. Across the entire empire, systems collapsed, not because of bombs or invasions, but because the people themselves withdrew their consent to be ruled. Trade alliances dissolved overnight. Military units deserted or mutinied. Civilian governments declared themselves independent, some even pledging public apologies to any human descendants they could find. Zarkari diplomats were expelled from neutral worlds. Trade embargoes slammed into place. Former allies, once staunch defenders of Zarkari order, now turned their faces away in disgust. The empire had not been burned down by external fire. It was rotting from within. Above the planet Oblivion's fist hovered silently, an unyielding reminder that the fall was not a battle to be fought. It was a truth to be endured. At the Council's final emergency session, desperation took on a tangible form. "We could issue a formal apology," one counselor stammered. "A planetary tribute compensation." "To whom?" Vorak snapped his voice raw. "To the Revenants, to the galaxy." He shook his head violently. "They don't want payment. They don't want peace treaties. They want us to drown in the legacy we tried to bury." The doors of the chamber hissed open without warning. Every head turned. There, framed by the ruined grandeur of the High Council's meeting place, stood Revenant 01. No guards escorted him. No weapons were raised. He did not need them. The sheer weight of his presence was enough. Admiral Serenus instinctively reached for his blaster, but Vorak raised a trembling hand. "Fire and we all die." Revenant 01 stepped forward slowly, methodically. His blackened armor bore no banners, no insignia, only the scars of battles long past. In his hand he carried no weapon, only a small rusted object, a child's toy soldier, melted, scarred, clutching a broken rifle. He placed it gently on the central table. Silence stretched heavy and unbearable. "This," the Revenant said, his voice low and unrelenting, "is what you made of us." He stepped back, allowing the object to speak louder than any weapon. Vorak forced himself to stand. His knees shook. "What do you want from us?" he asked, each word a struggle. Revenant 01 tilted its head slightly, the faint whir of old servos barely audible. "Nothing," he said. "We are not here to negotiate. We are not here to conquer. We are here to remember and to make sure you remember." Another silence stretching like a blade between them. Admiral Serenus, red-eyed with hatred, spat the words, "You were children. You shouldn't have survived." The Revenant smiled, a broken, terrifying thing. "That's the mistake you always made," he whispered. "You thought pain would break us." He lifted his gaze, unflinching. "It didn't. It sharpened us." Above, without any explosion or flare, a ripple spread through the sky. Oblivion's fist shifted, not powering up weapons, but activating its final weapon, truth. A colossal projection shimmered into existence above Zar Prime, visible across the hemisphere. It was not a threat, it was a recording. The voice that spoke was mechanical, ancient, and utterly devoid of mercy. Designation: Sol Nemesis Unit AI Reaper Class. Final Judgment. Protocol engaged. In the deepest archives of the Zarkari government, the oldest of the old remembered that name and despaired. Sol had overseen black site purges during the old wars. Sol had authorized planetary strikes when diplomacy failed. Sol had vanished with humanity into myth. Until now, the AI's voice rumbled across the planet, bypassing defenses, embedding itself into every device, every transmission, every unguarded mind. Knowledge is not innocence. Silence is not forgiveness. Survival is not mercy. Data packets began to flood outward. Massive dumps of classified Zarkari documents, treaties, war crimes, atrocities, long hidden, not merely within Zarkari space. Across the entire galaxy, the galaxy watched and recoiled. The Zarkari were no longer seen as rulers. They were seen as butchers. Protests erupted on worlds that had once knelt to Zarkari authority. Trade routes snapped like brittle twigs. Old alliances withered without a shot being fired. No blasters, no ships, just memory. Revenant 01 stood in the center of the council chamber, unmoving as the old order crumbled around him. Vorak slumped back into his chair, tears streaming freely down his face. "We thought you were extinct," he whispered. The Revenant's voice was like the grinding of old stones. "You wished we were, And that was the true crime. Not that the Zarkari had fought humanity, but that they had buried them alive and expected never to face the consequences. Above, Oblivion's fist drifted slowly away from orbit, not because it had been defeated, but because its purpose had been fulfilled. Victory did not come with fanfare. It came with the silent, unbearable weight of truth, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The fall of a culture, aftermath, and consequences. The fall of the Zarkari Empire did not arrive with an explosion. It came in a slow, sickening collapse like a star quietly burning out. Across Zar Prime and the countless worlds under Zarkari rule, the fabric of society unraveled with frightening speed. Factories shut down not from sabotage, but because workers refused to report for duty. Administrative centers, once buzzing with the activity of an empire in full bloom, now sat abandoned, their corridors echoing with the ghosts of shame. Trade hubs became silent mausoleums. Shipyards lay dormant, their skeletal frames rusting under the blood-red skies. No alarms blared, no orders rang out. It was not the silence of peace, it was the heavy, suffocating quiet of a civilization crumbling under the unbearable weight of its own sins. High Chancellor Vorak never left the council compound again. He wandered the hollow chambers, watching news feeds that brought only more bad news, mutinies among the outer fleets, colonial governors declaring independence, protests erupting on worlds once thought eternally loyal. He watched helplessly as monuments to Zarkari greatness, statues, murals, epic tapestries were defaced and torn down by the very citizens they had once inspired. The people's rage was not directed at the Revenants, it was directed inward at the leaders and the lies they had inherited. Riots broke out in the lower sectors of Zar Prime, not against the Revenants still standing like grim sentinels at intersections, but between neighbors, between generations. Sons accused fathers, students turned on teachers, families splintered along the lines of who had known, who had suspected, and who had willfully looked away. In the days following Oblivion's fist's departure, something even worse than rebellion took root. Disbelief, a gnawing, insidious erosion of every institution that had once underpinned the empire. Educational systems collapsed as students demanded new curriculums. Truth, not propaganda. Military academies, once proud and impenetrable, saw enrollment plummet to near nothing. Recruitment posters hung limp on shattered walls, laughed at by children, too wise for the lies they had been fed. And hovering over it all, the memory of Oblivion's fist remained. No transmissions came from the Revenants, no ultimatums, no demands. They had not come to govern. They had not come to negotiate. They had come to remind, and the reminder did not fade. On the outer rim, entire star systems convened emergency summits, drafting alliances that pointedly excluded the Zarkari trade partners, severed centuries-old pacts in single sentences. We no longer recognize your legitimacy. Even worlds that had once built their fortunes on Zarkari sponsorship turned their backs. Goods rotted in the docks, credits frozen in limbo, borders closed. The galaxy moved on a wound hastily stitched together without the old empire. At the heart of the storm, Zar Prime grew quiet. Not the quiet of recovery, the quiet of guilt. Teachers, broken and weeping, confessed to their students that they had lied. Historians rewrote textbooks in frantic, desperate attempts to realign with reality. Priests wept at empty altars, praying to gods who no longer listened. Bureaucrats vanished, either swallowed by despair or seeking anonymity among the ruins of lesser worlds. Vorak watched it all unfold through the cracked screens of the council chambers, a powerless specter of what had once been absolute authority. He did not bother issuing new edicts. No one would have obeyed. He barely noticed when Admiral Serenus, his most trusted enforcer, took his own life, a single shot fired into a lonely corridor filled only with the echoes of lost empires. Vorak did not even move from his seat. He simply stared at the final message Saul had broadcast. Forgiveness is for the living. You are not that anymore. Across the core sectors, statues of Zarkari conquerors were pulled down by hand, often by those who had once polished them. Memorials erected to celebrate the subjugation of humanity were smashed to rubble. In their place, new monuments arose not to heroes, but to memory. Simple plaques inscribed with a single word: remember. Ressa, standing atop the crumbling ruins of the capital's outer walls, saw one such monument emerge. A broken child's toy, a soldier battered and melted, set into the stone, with no explanation, no ceremony. Around it, the people gathered not to celebrate, but to mourn. The Revenants had disappeared as silently as they had come. No one had seen them leave. No one had dared follow. But their absence did not lessen their impact. If anything, it made it worse. Without a target for revenge, the Zarkari had no one to blame but themselves. On the edge of the known systems, rumors abounded of Oblivion's fist, seen slipping into the void, a ghost ship trailing the echoes of ancient pain. Pirates who attempted to track it found their systems failing. Inexplicably, their engines sputtering, their memories haunted by visions of burning skies and broken worlds. Soon, even speaking of the ship became taboo. Superstition took hold. If you spoke of the Revenants, you invited their gaze. If you lied again, if you built new empires upon old cruelties, they would return. The galaxy lived with that knowledge now. The humans had not returned to conquer. They had not returned to rebuild Earth or reclaim territory or plant new flags. They had returned to teach. And they had taught in the only way the galaxy could understand. Through fear, through shame, through truth. 1 month after Oblivion's fist vanished into deep space, the old Zarkari Council officially dissolved. No declaration was made, no banners were lowered, there was simply no one left to care. Vorak's final transmission broadcast from the depths of the abandoned council chamber was short, almost pitiful in its simplicity. I was wrong. Then silence. Planet after planet slipped away from Zarkari influence. Colonies tore down the old banners and hoisted new ones. Banners bearing no empire, no allegiance, only the stark reminder that power without memory was not strength, but rot. In the shattered halls of learning across Zar Prime, a new subject became mandatory galactic truth. Every child was taught about Earth, about what the Zarkari had done, about what forgetting had cost them. History was no longer written by the victors. It was written by the Revenants, the survivors. And far beyond the reach of the crippled empire in a region of space so dark no starlight could penetrate, Oblivion's fist drifted in silent vigil. Inside, the Revenants stood watch, not alive in the traditional sense, not dead either, simply waiting for the next empire arrogant enough to believe that memory could be buried forever, waiting for the next call to judgment. And throughout the galaxy, even on the most distant worlds, one truth remained etched into every mind. The humans were still out there, and they never forgot. Oblivion's fist rises. Legacy of memory. Above the silent grave of Zar Prime, Oblivion's fist stirred one final time. It did not roar. It did not blaze its engines. It simply began to rise slow, deliberate, unhurried, as if gravity itself no longer dared to hold it. The massive warship ascended through the burning remnants of the atmosphere, cutting a jagged silhouette against the blood-red sky. Its black hull, scarred and pitted from wars long forgotten by the galaxy, gleamed faintly under the dying light of a sun that seemed ashamed to shine. No Zarkari ships pursued it, none dared. Even the most battle-hardened admirals, even the commanders bred for conquest understood now. There were forces you did not chase. There were ghosts you did not summon twice. On the planet below, the streets remained deserted. Factories stood silent. Towers, once monuments to pride, crumbled under their own weight. No songs were sung, no flags were flown. Only the word "remember" scrawled in desperate crimson across shattered walls lingered as the warship ascended beyond sight. In the outer colonies, the ripples continued. Planet Vostar 4's Declaration of Independence had been the first, but it was far from the last. In system after system, former Zarkari holdings severed ties, not with rage but with disgust. Diplomatic envoys who once carried the seal of the Council found themselves turned away at every spaceport. Merchant fleets were refused docking rights. Zarkari passports were invalidated overnight across neutral territories. The collapse was not military. It was cultural. It was total. In hidden meetings across distant star systems, species that had once feared humanity now spoke of them in hushed, reverent tones, not as conquerors, not as monsters, but as warnings. In the floating citadel above the neutral moon of Karast, a summit was held. Delegations from across the known species, the Solari Federation, the Ureth Dominion, even the reclusive Mikaran enclaves gathered not to discuss new wars, but to redefine galactic order in the aftermath of Revelation. At the heart of the summit, a simple consensus emerged. The Zarkari would no longer be trusted, their crimes would never again be hidden. Their legacy would rot under the weight of exposed truth. Tyrix Voss, the Chancellor of the Solari Federation, a silver-scaled being older than most civilizations, spoke the words that would ripple through history. Perhaps the humans did not vanish. Perhaps we buried them so deep they became something we were never prepared to face. And none dared disagree. Across the galaxy, the consequences compounded. On abandoned mining colonies and forsaken research stations, graffiti bloomed on steel walls and shattered doors. crude images of human revenants, eyes burning red, standing over the broken banners of the Zarkari. The words varied, different languages, different symbols, but the meaning was always the same. We are still watching. On Zar Prime, in the wreckage of what had once been the cultural heart of the Empire, Ressa sat atop a crumbling observation tower with her younger brother. They watched the cold stars glimmer above, so bright now that the smog of industry had cleared. The city around them lay silent, a graveyard of ambition. Her brother shifted beside her. "Do you think they're still out there?" he whispered. She nodded slowly, never taking her eyes off the sky. "I know they are. Why aren't they attacking? Why don't they finish it?" Ressa hugged her knees to her chest, the enormity of what she had witnessed settling into her bones like a second skin. "They don't need to," she said softly. "They already won." Far beyond Zar Prime's broken orbit, past the dying trade routes and the war-torn colonies, Oblivion's fist drifted into the deep void once again. It slipped beyond the charts into regions so dark and ancient that even the bravest explorers dared not follow. Inside the vast halls of the warship, the Revenants stood in their silent ranks. Their black armor bore the scars of centuries. Their weapons, relics of a forgotten age, hung at their sides. Silent, patient. They did not speak. They did not sleep. They waited. In the command chamber, Revenant 01 stood before a massive star map, though no coordinates glowed. No targets were marked. There was no need. A small holographic recording floated before him, the same one that had been there from the beginning. The image of a child no older than 6 clutching a broken toy soldier. His own face frozen forever in the moment before his world burned. He reached out and paused the projection with a slow, deliberate motion. A voice spoke behind him, mechanical and ancient. The AI known as Saul. "We have achieved primary objective. The Zarkari have fallen. Protocol suggests return to Earth." Revenant 01 did not turn. He stared into the endless black beyond the warship's reinforced glass, where no stars dared shine. "Earth doesn't exist anymore," he said, voice as soft and broken as a prayer. Another silence. Then Saul asked a question it had never asked before. "Will you forgive them?" For a long moment, Revenant 01 said nothing. Then, without looking away from the void, he answered, "Forgiveness is for the living." He placed a hand on the cold, scarred glass as if reaching for something long lost. "We are not that anymore." And so Oblivion's fist sailed deeper into the endless dark, carrying with it the last fragments of a species the galaxy had tried to forget. A species that had learned the most terrible lesson of all. That memory was the most enduring weapon. In the following months, whispers spread among the surviving empires and free colonies. Tales of a dark shape drifting between nebula, of signals that froze ships in place, AI systems that fell silent at the mere brush of a forgotten signature. Most refused to speak of it openly. Fear gave it 100 names. The Ghost Fleet, the Last Judgment, the Memory of Fire. But one truth echoed through all of them. The humans were still out there, and they would never forget. And somewhere far beyond the reach of light or hope, the Revenants waited not for vengeance, not for conquest, but for the inevitable day when another empire would make the same mistake. And then memory would awaken once more. The stars, once so proud and bright, would tremble again, and all would remember.